and welcome back to another episode of the VC Corner. For those of you joining us for the first time, the VC Corner is a series of episodes talking to seasoned angel investors, VC founders, and PE founders alike. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Ankit. Ankit is not only an investor, he's also an entrepreneur. He's the founding partner at Riceberg Ventures, a Zurich-based early-stage deep tech venture capital firm. Fun fact about Ankit, he actually also comes from a pretty fair academic background in physics, coupled with his experience as a researcher in a Nobel Prize-winning LIGO-Virgo collaboration project on gravitational waves and observation. I don't want to go into too much detail about Ankit. I'd love Ankit to introduce himself. Ankit, if you'd like to give our viewers a quick intro about yourself, that'd be perfect.
Hi everyone, and thanks Ori for inviting me here. You have been very generous with my intro. Quick about my background: a physicist, basically started my journey as a physics teacher, turned entrepreneur, turned investor. So that has been around it. Of course, just caveat, I would like to add that Nobel Prize-winning research. I didn't win the Nobel Prize, but my bosses did. So that's just a star mark that people don't get confused. Uh,
No problem.
Jokes apart, but yes, that I have been. I grew up in India and basically started my early career as a physics teacher there for something I don't know if you heard about IIT. IITs are the top institutes in India, and there is an entrance exam for that IIT. So I was teaching a student to prepare for that entrance exam, and that was my first, let's say, career or also entrepreneurial career because we had our own private tutoring coaching institute or something. And from there, life evolved. I moved to Europe primarily to work into research. But after some time, I realized that if you are an entrepreneur, you can't do other things. So ended up back in the startup game. We together, I mean, a friend of mine did a spin-off, which I jumped on board from ETH Zurich, where I studied a
Okay.
medtech startup. So that was my back journey back into the startup world where last few years we were growing that medtech startup, and that's naturally as an like, but while we were basically going through our own journey, we realized that there is still quite a lot of gap in the understanding of the early stage venture capital in deep tech space, right? And the language that it requires to understand what does it take to build a deep tech company, what time, patience, and everything. There is a gap in terms of let's say investor community, where I thought we could fill in, right? So when I started investing as an angel investor, I saw that there was or we saw, I mean, we were as a group of friends doing angel investor together. So we saw that actually entrepreneurs appreciated us, right? Even if they had big VCs on cap table. I mean, we co-invested with quite a big names. I wouldn't name all of these guys here, but we co-invested with quite a big VCs around the world, and still entrepreneur really valued us, even if we coming as a small angel in those rounds. And that was a clear calling that okay, there is something that we are bringing on the table, which is more than just money, right? It has less to do with how much money you have in hand, but it's more to do with the value you add. And with that goal, we ended up jumping on this boat, uh, moved to this side of the table, and that's how we founded Iceberg Venture, and that's how the entire deep tech focus of the startup actually gets into the picture.
No, that's awesome. And obviously, investors or venture capitalists come from all different kind of backgrounds. Your background specifically, within the physics side of things. What I'd love to know, Ankit, is maybe in your kind of view, do you think there's any kind of skills or any kind of attributes that you brought with yourself from your kind of really scientific background into venture capital that is really aiding your decision making or maybe influencing your investment strategies?
Yes, I mean that's a quite interesting question. Actually, this is a question that I've been asked in whatever I do, like also as an entrepreneur and all. That people always ask, how come from being a physicist to an entrepreneur? Now people ask, okay, how come from being a physicist to an investor? As a physicist, whenever we worked or studied, we use that common, let's say, a joke that what we learn as a physicist is solve problems, right? So more, if you really ask me to pinpoint what I carried along is primarily the problem solving skills, right? Now, those problems can be anything, right? I mean, those problems are, of course, normally we solve the scientific problems there, right? But here also business problems are also does basically require that structured thinking, right? And building things, any research also what you are doing is you are building in steps, right? You are taking upon somebody who have done something in past, you build upon it, you add something, and you do that those incremental gain to get to the final result that you want to add. That's like a scientific or analytical skill, whatever you want to call it. Definitely carries forward across everything that you do, right? It's not just
Yeah, definitely.
investing, but it's also in general in entrepreneurship as well. Of course, specific to our focus, investing in deep tech, it's an added advantage because you are a bit one of the rare species here, right? It's not too many people where normally, like, when you talk to an entrepreneur and then they are talking about certain terms that, okay, we are using this and that technology. And sometimes they get surprised when you start to go in a detail of those technology because maybe you have worked. I mean, it's not like I worked in everything in past physics, right? But sometimes, I mean, recently happened with me that one of the founders we were talking to, and they were talking about quantum enhanced sensor. And of course, they didn't know much about my background while we were having that discussion. But actually, while I was working during my thesis, I worked on quantum enhanced sensor, right? So I could go a bit in a further detail to ask those questions, which actually helped them that, okay, wait, now there is somebody that we can talk in the same language. So that goes
Yeah, and I
into
guess
very
that's very valuable.
specialized, yeah. So on a very specialized way, but even on one level higher is that even if you're working or investing in any deep tech company, when founders say that they are picking up from X and Y research, I'm never afraid of asking that, okay, please send me across. I would love to read those papers, right? And based on that, infer my feeling that what is there, right? And even if I don't understand that part, maybe there is some friend of mine who might have worked in that area that I can quickly send it to. What do you think about it? Right? So these all are definitely a very very good advantage. That is just yeah, you can call it an unfair advantage that we get over other investors that we can actually not other investor who don't have scientific background on this area. Right? So that helps,
Yeah,
especially in the
100%.
beginning.
Yeah, I'm guessing it also gonna puts you guys, like you mentioned, like an advantage, but it puts you guys somewhat ahead of some potential competition that you guys have. I'm guessing, obviously, a founder who can relate to you essentially on a ground level of their company is going to be really interested in working with somebody who can really understand the product and really get behind it. In most cases, usually they're quite passionate about the projects they're building up. So, I mean, again, just to kind of give the viewers an idea, not everybody knows, what a deep tech company is. Do you mind kind of explaining, maybe in kind of broad terms, what deep tech startups are, or what maybe they focus on, so people just have a better idea of what we're referring to as we go forward?
You ask may have a different interpretation of deep tech. So I can only give mine, like what we use as a benchmark at Riceberg, right? That what we qualify as a deep tech. So for us, deep tech is primarily that a technology that is not available off the shelf, right? It requires some sort of research to develop that technology, right? Um, Again, that depends on sector to sector, how much that effort is required, or how much time it requires, how much money it requires. That can vary among the sectors. But typically, a technology which is not available off the shelf requires certain amount of research and development to be able to develop that technology, right? So that's the first big qualifier on the technology side that technology can fall into the deep tech bucket. But then I would answer what is a deep tech startup for us, right? So as a deep tech startup, what we qualify that like in every startup, right? So you have been engaged in the startup ecosystem, so you must be knowing that, right? That in every startup, we normally try to answer one or two very critical questions. If that gets answered, then the startup gets their inflection point, product market fit inflection point, whatever term you use in different contexts, you can call them, right? Normally those inflection points can be driven by different kind of solutioning, right? So sometimes those inflection points could be driven by market trend, sometimes could be driven by user behavior, right? But sometimes that is solely driven by a technological accomplishment. That, let's say, everybody knows that if one is able to achieve X and Y, then people gonna like it. people gonna adopt it, right? Whether whichever customer segment you are talking about, whether it's a B2B or whether it's a customer, doesn't matter. But whoever is the customer, it's very clear that if somebody can achieve this particular thing, this particular outcome out of a technology, then people gonna adapt it. And only blocker, or one of the major blocker at this moment, is the technology is not yet developed. The technology is not there yet, which can solve that problem. And if a startup comes with the claim that we can solve that problem, the technological problem, and develop that technology which can drive that adoption, that's what we put into the tech, right? That the inflection point of the startup is driven by the technology. It's not just driven by market behavior. Of course, in reality, it will be a mix of the both, right? Even if you drive
Of
by
course, yeah.
technology, there is a point you'll have to also add do marketing and everything. But where is your major uh, driver of the inflection point, right? So that's a deep tech, right? So it can be software, it can be hardware. The sector can be anything, right? So then you can have deep tech within climate, you can have deep tech within agriculture, you can have deep tech within healthcare, you can have deep tech within even software like AI, cybersecurity. OpenAI is a deep tech startup. SpaceX is a deep tech startup, right?
Yep.
For example, Nvidia is a deep tech startup, or as a classic example, even Apple was a deep tech startup of their own time, right? So these were all examples of deep tech startup, right? So why I'm putting these examples, because there is a lot of confusion in the community, right? People think, deep tech, is that even a startup? Yes, right? Do you really think deep tech can be a startup? It has that potential, but actually, if you look at the top 10 names of the startup successes so far, they have been primarily driven by the tech. Yeah, there are also non-deep tech startup which succeeded. I mean, at Netflix, the problem of Netflix was not just the crack the technology; it was a part of it, but another part was the distribution, right? How to acquire the rights of those movie and to be able to stream to all the people, right? That was the major thing that they drove to basically make this startup successful, right? It was all apart from technology, there were other factors driving that startup. While there are other startups like SpaceX, primarily can you crack that rocket technology? That primarily drove their success, right? So that's how we classify, right? If tech driven success inflection point, and the tech is not off the shelf available. That's what we call it.
No, that's awesome. I appreciate that explanation. I think people will find that quite insightful. And obviously, when it comes to investing or even like growing a startup versus or some other kind of sector startup versus a deep tech startups, each one comes with its own challenges. From your kind of view as an investor, your perspective from that point of view, what would you say are the biggest challenges when it comes to actually investing in deep tech startups, especially at that early stage when there's a lot more uncertainty in play?
I mean, ideally, like, this is one part where I would disagree, or I would try to emphasize more. When people say that in deep tech there are more uncertainty, from my own experience, so far what I know from the startup world and being an entrepreneur and everything, actually there is an uncertainty in every startup, right?
Of course,
It's
yeah,
easy to call ourselves that this is easier versus that, but actually building a startup is not easy. If you want to make a $1 billion business within 5 to 10 years, it's not gonna be easy, irrespective what sector you pick up, right?
100%.
So it's difficult and uncertainties are everywhere. But how do we see those challenges, right? And the nature of challenges differs, right? Because in other startups, primarily driving revenue and distribution, right? Acquiring customers, these are the major pain points, right? That your product
Yeah,
is a part of it, but more important that how are you acquiring it? How are you controlling your customer acquisition cost, right? And these are the points on which if you are investing in a let's say a e-commerce startup or a fintech startup, you can judge a founder how smart they are, how frugal they are on these financial metrics, that how they are building this particular entire business, right? And this is easier because it's very like it's the final litmus test. Actually, it's the real smoke test, you can call it, or litmus test you can call it, because if a founder can prove that they can uh, sustainably grow their revenue, grow their profits, they are growing towards the right path. These are all clear with the number, right? They are all clear with the customer behavior, right? So you develop a much easier confidence because those metrics are well defined and easy to track. The biggest challenge of investing in early stage deep tech is not having well defined metrics, right? And that's what, like, we are getting better at it by doing it, right? So personally, we have our own internal metric that we track our status upon, which I also love sharing, like, in on my social media and all. I keep sharing those whatever we try to develop internally. our own way, and which differs very specific to that particular startup you are talking about, right? Or very specific to at least the sector of the startup. Within deep tech also, every sector will have its own metric to track. Right? So those defining that metric and to be able to track on those metric and even convince the founder that I'm tracking you on this metric, right? It's very difficult, right? Because these are non-standard, right? You don't have to convince a founder that I'm tracking you on a revenue, right? If it's a already revenue making startup, right? I'm tracking you on a cap because those are taught in MBA class, right? That okay, this is how you build businesses, right? You can't say that I'm tracking you on X and Y revenue while this as X and Y metric, while this metric is not agreed across industry, right? Me as an investor can be tracking on something else, and somebody else is tracking on something else, right? And then founder get confused that okay, what should I care about, right? What should I really focus upon? So that's the one of the major challenge, not having well-defined metric in these, and that's what we are internally trying to improve upon, right? To put it more stabilized, more standardized, at least what we understand, and we make that clear to the
Yeah.
founder that hey, this is our way of working, right? And we would love to do that. Most time, if you can explain reasonably, then founders agree to that, and then it's all good. If not, then, then it creates confusion. I hope it
No,
answers your question.
yeah, 100%. And I mean, obviously, there's kind of two sides, like you mentioned. Obviously, like the founder side, and obviously the kind of conceptualized idea side as well. From looking at the founder side, because I hear it time and time again. A great team and a great idea makes the perfect kind of combination for a startup or kind of element. In terms of yourself, when you're looking at these deep tech startups, is there any kind of specific qualities or attributes or maybe backgrounds that you really like to see in the founders that are running the show?
Things which are very specific to one particular type of startup you are trying to talk about, right? So the most personally, this can be this could be debatable, but my personal opinion and all the successful deep tech founders we have seen that because of the current state in the ecosystem of deep tech we are in, it takes much longer than you plan, right? So if you are building a deep tech startup, you need to be in here for something else than just making money, right?
Mm,
It's very difficult to stay and persevere through the entire ups and downs of this sector if money is the only motivation, because in principle you can make much quicker money with other things that you might be doing. May not be even a startup, maybe just all these guys that we are basically becoming a founder, typically a deep tech founders, are very well qualified people, right? They are ex scientists,
yeah,
they
of
are ex
course.
PhDs or top notch engineers working at the very top engineering company or a tech company. These guys leave that and become a founder, right? So if money is there or motivation, they will always every second day or every couple of weeks or couple of months they will get an opportunity which pays them more than what this startup can pay in next 5 years, right? And their motivation can always be subject to the it can rock, it can shake. But if they are in for some other reason, right, whatever is that reason, right, whether they want to solve that particular tech problem or they are driven by the impact, they or or they just love what they are doing, right? That they just enjoy that
Yeah,
what they are doing, then it becomes easier. So normally, what quality we try to check in the team that what why they are doing this, right? Why taking they are making their own life so difficult, right? And that is one of the important criteria. Of course, there are then more specific criteria that goes into that what business they are building, then what kind of secret sauce they have, what is unfair advantage they have in that particular business, right? Either they have that good tech background or they have a good connection in the industry that they are working in. There need to be something more than just an idea and just the motivation. But then the first quality is also very, very important, right? I mean, this is and and most of the successful deep tech entrepreneurs I know are like that. I mean, most of those guys are like, just pay my bills and I'll keep doing this for my entire life. It doesn't matter. And these guys go
yeah,
long.
it's a passion,
Really, really.
right? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, it's something that they're quite interested in. What we've seen actually quite a lot recently, and I guess this is more kind of a question towards you, is a lot of founders, especially in the deep tech spaces, it's usually their first company they're founding. A lot of the founders that we're seeing is like the first kind of step into it, or maybe they've done something in the past similar, but it wasn't, you know, a full-fledged startup that they're really kind of pushing by themselves. From your kind of perspective, you know, as the investor, obviously your background in a scientific side as well. What do you do to support the founders once you kind of made an investment, kind of going along with them?
um, Especially
Okay,
when India we are active. Now I'm observing certain trends of operators and founders moving away from a unicorn that they have built sometime or they grew as an operator. Now they are moving towards deep tech, right? Because they took that first choice because that was easier at the time, but now
interesting.
they know how to work the business. But they have been engineer at their heart earlier, right? So now they are trying to jump. I mean, like Elon Musk is another classic example, right? A physicist building a fintech business, jumping back to a space business after being successful, right? So just wanted to highlight that it's not always the case. There are some exceptions and changes, which is good. But of course, when we made an investment, right, and of course, most likely this could be a first-time founders, right? In general, that's not only applicable to this case. In general, we whenever we are making an investment, we know that we are making investment because of this reason, which we have a high conviction, which covers 80% of the things. But we know that there is always a 20% gap, right? Now every team will have that, right? Not only some 20% gap, and that we try to see how we can fill it, right? Like how we can fill in that part, right? For example, as let's pick up a specific example. For example, in a space tech, right? So we are very actively investing in space tech, and we were quite active in Indian geography as well in space tech. So what we observed that Indian space tech currently is booming quite a lot. There are a lot of founders coming up there because they privatized space tech in 2019, and then the new space policy was released this year. And India has built a huge amount of talent pool through government organizations like ISRO, which were very frugal in what their engineering, right? You might have heard their success like Mars missions and Rayan, right? The moon mission and all, right? So there is a very frugal engineering mindset. Scientists were working in the organization, right? Now they see an opportunity that they can go out and they can form their own startups, right? So there is an inflow of a lot of these scientists who have worked in a government institution and now want to start their own startup. They are very good
Yeah,
technically, right? They are very good at organizational skill. They also know how to work frugal, right? That the good part of a specific case of ISRO scientists that they are good at just doing frugal engineering because that's what Indian Space Agency was known for. How can you do a project less than a movie budget? That's what they branded. So all those startup culture is already there, right? That they in there. But what is missing from them? They may not be the greatest in networking, right? These are the not guys who go always out in a conference and talk about themselves because they never needed to because they were
true.
always
Yeah,
they had the tag of the top institution in the country, right? So wherever they will walk, they will get the respect. So they don't have to sell themselves, right? They don't have to talk to other people, right? This is something that they will be missing, right? But primarily the selling attitude you will be they will be missing, right? Now, sometimes it's inherent in them, and it takes a bit of slight coaching to pull it out of them, and that's these kind of supports that we would love to do, right? So like normally if we see that okay there is a good founder, they have the potential to sell as well, but it's not coming out well, we normally try to make them like let them join at or make them make introduction to some customer. Maybe first call, uh, you will be tagging along, right, when you made the intro. But then you see slowly they start taking over. So that value add, wherever you see the gap and you see the value add, uh, that's what we try to do. Roughly, you can call the mentorship. However, I must confess that this is not something that we are running a school or a training camp. That okay,
of course.
you as a founder, you come and we will train you to how to sell. This doesn't work in entrepreneurship, and we don't even want that, right? Because at the end is something that is their business, and it will be totally unfair for us to say that because I taught you how to sell, that's why you can sell. No, if is they are almost 90% there, you add some those 10% sometime, or sometime you even just like your confidence that you add, right? With my founders, the kind of relationship I normally end up sharing that they are so comfortable that they call me mid of the night, right? When they are stuck, that we are stuck, right? Or okay, fine. And then, then, and honestly, at that point, I may not be adding a real solution, but just being listening to them and adding them a confidence that you are thinking in the right direction. Go ahead,
Yeah.
it will be okay. And we are there. If something goes wrong, we are there, right? That confidence helps a lot. They figure it out themselves. Normally, they figure it out themselves. Right? So that mentorship, giving them enough freedom, letting them grow, letting them fail, that helps. You know? And that actually comes from my background as a teacher. So I started as a teacher, so that's something is another secret sauce I carry. I know when to. I mean, not know is the wrong word, but at least I I'm good at finding out when to intervene and when not. When you can be just chilling on the side and it's gonna be fine. Let them do what they want.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's like you mentioned, it's stuff that you bring kind of with you from your scientific background and, your kind of academic background as well, kind of bringing it as a value add to the founders, in that kind of sense of how you support them, whether it's fully hands-on, whether it's kind of taking a step back and letting them figure out that by themselves while you kind of give a listening ear. I think that kind of approach, is really interesting. It's more of a case by case basis rather than kind of one size kind of fits all. So I'm guessing, Ankit, once you have, a founder and a startup that you're interested in, what kind of due diligence process do you usually kind of go through? What's your kind of vetting process, if you will, once you know you want to make an investment, but you're yet to make that investment?
To do
Of
very
course.
detailed due diligence. And the biggest challenge is that you should do it without straining the founder, right? Because if you are stressing the founder quite a lot in your due diligence, you are basically hampering their business, right? And you may not end up making the investment, but you let them go through a long cycle where they will see it was a useless exercise for them. So it need to be like, you need to find the very right thin line that without disturbing them, how do you get out the information you want to get, right? So this is a long process. We take our time. So the first confession there is that we are not one of the VCs where a founder comes and says that, okay, we are closing it in 2 weeks. Can you say yes and no? Uh, as much as we would love to start supporting them if we like them, but we normally try to very transparent and think that we will take a sweet time to develop our conviction because develop that is going after and the kind of industry we are in, we know that nothing changes in a week or two. This is not that within a week there is
That's
another
true, yeah.
competition comes up and then they take over, right? So we also try to calm down founder. It's okay, right? That you can make 2 weeks, it's not a big problem. Of course, we don't want to do a bureaucratic unnecessary delay, right? So that's the balance we find. But going back to your original question of due diligence, right? So though the process is extensive, it's roughly bucketed in three criteria, three buckets or three pillars. The first one that we very closely look into is the value chain delta that product creates. So you remember, like last in beginning, I told that there is an inflection point that a startup is driving, right? We go back to that basic question and we start to ask, like, whatever problem you are solving, how currently people solve that problem, right? And we start to try to put numbers to it and to establish the existing value chain, right? That okay, and like currently, it may not be the best way to solve. And when founders say that this problem is never solved before, then there is something fishy going on, right? We solve problem. It may not be the most optimal way of solving problem. That means you have not gone to the core of a problem. Before aeroplane, also people traveled. They traveled. Took really, really long to go from India to UK, but they traveled. So the point is that you see what is the existing value chain. That okay, let's say you are inventing an aeroplane, right? Putting an example. So you want to say, okay, I want to solve travel. I want to solve a travel between point A to B, which is let's say more than 500 kilometers, which in generally takes days before you actually go from one place to another, right? Now, what will happen with my new technology? You can cover that distance in an hour. That's a delta of the time that you are saving is a factor of 10 or 20 or more, right? So this is what I call value chain optimization, right? So you find that existing value chain and you say, by your technology in place, how much better it gonna be? And that better we try to classify on three criteria, either cheaper or faster or safer. Because we are active in medtech, the safety is one of the important parameters also that we try to classify.
Yeah, of course.
And if that factor is more than five, then it will start to become interesting. If it's a 20% optimization, irrespective how cool the technology technology is, it may not end up making a startup case. So step one, value chain delta, which need to be several factors than just some percentage. Then step two, we come to the market size. Once we say, okay, there is a problem and this technology definitely solves that problem by a huge, huge factor, right? Then we are convinced that this works. But how many people have that problem? How many people do care about that problem, right? With that, we try to get to the market size, which is then goes to the standard VC metric, right? That the market overall TAM should be 10 billion plus, less than 100 billion. That is standard
Of
that
course,
most of
yeah.
the VCs are using. We go to that, but that's how we try to get to a true market size. What I normally try to always point out, please tell me honest market size, because though market size is a very obvious question that we talk about in due diligence, but most of the decks we receive, this is always the slide which is done
I've heard that more
badly.
than you can think.
More than we can think, right? So that's where we use our first principle approach to calculate the market size. And we do it together with the founder. They can challenge us that, no, you are missing this factor, that factor, but we do that together with them to go to the honest market size, right? And that should fall into a VC bucket, right? That it should be a VC fund level startup. Once we are convinced that, okay, there is a value chain optimization happening here, then there is a market size is there. Then third, we look at the founder, that okay, what this team has an advantage to get there, right? What secret sauce they carry. Now, as I discussed in earlier, this could be that their technical knowledge, there could be their network in the industry, their passion, or mix of all, right? But there need to be certain secret sauce that why this team can deliver to that product as compared to somebody else, right? So broadly, these are the three categories on which we try to get as detailed answer as possible, right? When we are doing a stage which is very like pre-seed, right? It's just an idea and a founder, right? It's that time there is no
Quite
traction.
early on,
Of
yeah.
course, when you are doing seed investment, then of course you go more on attraction as well. That okay, I bought into your story, I bought into the founder, but you had certain money in your hand. What did you do for with that money? And how did you progress with that money? Now you don't have to give me the revenue figure, but we would like to see how they are using the money, right? In the pre-seed to seed journey, very important to understand how founders are handling money, right? And are they putting to the real core problem rather than investing in something that may not be that relevant? So then stage by stage start to differ, right? Of course, once you are in a scaling phase, you can start seeing revenues. But in early stage, these are the factors we look into. So then traction comes into the
The pre-seed stage is, the kind of Wild West. It's an extreme unknown. There's so many uncertainties that come into
play.
play. You have a bit more ground to stand on once you're in seed stage, and obviously,
But the
as you,
markups are also there, right? So the benefit is
oh,
that if
100%.
you get the good ones in the pre-seed, then you make the real multiples as a VC, right? So
No, that's most definitely, yeah. And then obviously, as you go forward in the investment cycle, then the returns are a little bit less, but the certainties are is much bigger there with what you can back. So I mean, okay, obviously you have quite a deep dive into your due diligence process. So once you've made that investment, how do you kind of measure the success on essentially your investment, especially in the early stage? So let's say you invested in a pre-seed startup. What are your indicators for measuring? This has been a successful investment. Obviously, not essentially when you're exiting, but in that kind of growth phase. What's the indicators that you look for?
discussing earlier that you define those metrics to track your hypothesis, that how much your hypotheses are becoming true and how much they are basically changing, right? While you as you grow. Not all changes are bad, some changes are for good, but roughly, are you on the right track? So if you made an hypothesis with just with your pre-seed investment, you will have a POC, and then you start to see that you are nowhere close to even have a POC, or even the basic team is not fall together. Then you see something is going wrong there, right? But if you say, okay, we wanted this much investment and this is where we wanted to reach by having from pre-seed to seed, and if the startup is on track to that, it's successful, right? So that's internal, right? That's how we develop our conviction. Of course, externally we can't claim those things, right? Because nobody cares, honestly. Like if I go to like limited partners or whatever, right? Outside
Yeah, of
people who
course.
are judging us, right? They won't care that we believe that startups are good. There are other metrics which comes into play. Of course, the product successes, right? That what is the product launch, what is their timeline, if there is a pilot going on. So those are product related. Or on a company level, very high level, first thing that we start judging upon is the co-investors, right? That we made our investment, we may be the first one to put the check, and the next round happened, and who are the co-investors who came up, right? And then the same people who are like, people we respect as a co-investors. Earlier, they were skeptical of those startups. Now, through our money, through our value add in the next phase of the journey, now they are happy to jump on board. That gives us a confidence that during this period, some of the questions which were the big unknowns earlier stage are now answered, and that people are basically seeing it, right? So having those co-investors in early stage is a very important criteria. Of course, as a VC, you also start to look into how your portfolios are growing. When next round is happening, are you getting a markup or not, right? That's what I mean, I'll be honest that that's what VC funds are being judged upon, right? So that also we need to be careful about. But these are the criteria, right? The markup to your investment, co-investors. These are the financial criteria. Product criteria is that are they delivering to the or are they on the track to the milestone they promised? Is team is growing? Are they adding up more and more much better team after they got the investment, right? That better people that you earlier thought that okay that person may not work for that startup is now joining on there because they love what they are doing, right? How the team is growing, how the product is growing, all these criteria gives you the fair indicator that is going well.
I think one really interesting thing you actually just touched on is a co-investment. I'd love to kind of dig into that a little bit more, just to kind of get your perspective. So, in terms of yourself, obviously, the people that you co-invest with, it could essentially mean you're kind of backing, what their idea, or they could be backing, the idea of you investing in that kind of startup, or there could be a multitude of different factors that come into play. How do you really identify maybe other VC firms or angel investors or whoever it may be to co-invest with? What are your criteria in terms of a co-investor for, maybe Riceberg or yourself as an angel investor?
To a stage where capital becomes their one of the most important need, right? You know that the product is almost being figured out. They have built a great team. They have a excellent set of advisors. So they are good on their business building side. But just that it requires a lot of capital to be able to do that. You would love to have those co-investors who can afford to have that kind of a check, right? One of these co-investors fill that
Mm,
gap, right?
yeah,
And would love to have him on board, right? Because normally not just an advisor, yeah, right?
yeah,
And they have their skin in the game, their advice becomes more something that we can count upon, right? Because
100%.
their money is involved, right? So that's how we look into, right? So different phases, pre-product phase or pre-business figured out phase. Let's call it pre-business figured out phase. It's important that more and more value add investor joins in, who can bring value and fill the gaps that you have, whether in terms of product, whether in terms of business, customer introduction, or even having that right access to the capital, right? When you go grow beyond that post-product phase, you have proven yourself, then you definitely want to scale, and then you need to have those co-investors who have enough appetite to be able to help you scale. Um, and that's how we look into it, right? And normally it's about having the common vision. So that was like generic criteria. But when you say how do you qualify, so normal procedure is that whenever we are making an investor introduction or a co-investor introduction to a startup, firstly we get on a call with them. We tell about why we love this startup, hear their perspective,
Okay.
see their vision. If they were a co-investor, how would they see this growing? And because you have been with the founder for long, you know that will founder buy into that vision or not, right? If we see there is a vision mismatch, we don't even make that intro, right? Irrespective how big the fund is, right? Because there is no point. If there is a vision mismatch, nothing will happen. But if we see there is a vision matching, then we go ahead and make that intro. So having that conversation, that conversation over that case, why we sharing our understanding, why we think is a good one, getting challenged on that, and then hearing their perspective and finding that common ground that this makes sense. And the moment you start to mix, like, okay, these are the good partners, because your co-investors are your partners, right? They're
Yeah.
gonna be sitting on the cap table together with you. They're gonna be co-defining the vision together with the founders and you for the company. Of course, founder will lead to show, but they will have their own say. And you want to bring right people, otherwise it's gonna be a problem.
No, 100%. I think obviously co-investors are, your partners in it. And then also, ultimately from the founder's perspective, the individuals that are going to be, or the funds that are going to be investing in their startup as well, it's crucial for them to kind of get, all kinds of different perspectives, multiple slices of the pie, if you will, from different expertise and different backgrounds, depending on the stage, their startup is in. as well. So I think it's a kind of multitude from the investor side, the founder side, and then kind of well-rounded element, of who's going in essentially at what round or what kind of stage in the startup. I mean, in terms of kind of going back to your journey, Anki, in terms of yourself, obviously you came from a background that isn't obviously venture capital. You came from a scientific background into venture capital. So, is there any kind of advice you would give to somebody who's looking to make the transition from maybe a scientific background or maybe potentially a different background into kind of venture capital? I know you mentioned when we spoke previously that you never imagined if I told you now that you're going to be in venture capital, you would have said no way. So, is there any kind of advice you'd impart on somebody who's potentially thinking of making that kind of transition?
I said
Yeah,
last time that I would not be making that decision because I didn't know much about it, what VC does. Because a very small niche industry, close black, just everybody knows everybody, right? And that's the circle. So first thing I would say, anybody who want to transition into VC, they should start talking to VCs. They should start networking with VCs. Go to the events where you meet them, talk to them, and get involved. Right? And you can get involved in multiple ways, right? I mean, of course, you can go and work for a VC and be an intern, but you can also be involved in a community. You can involve in a, let's say, an accelerator. This world is looking really for help, right? All the time. Most of the VCs welcome volunteer works, right? So the most important part will be to actually get involved, talk to the people, and try to experience a part of their work. You cannot experience everything, but try to experience a part of this work because it may not, it's not for everybody. It may be exciting for somebody, but it may be like really, really boring for someone because sometimes it feels monotonous or sometimes you feel like you're not adding value, right? And you hear a lot of hate also, right? You also have to because if something goes wrong in the startup ecosystem, the first ones are to blame is the VCs, right? That they messed it up, right? so you need to understand that is it why are you doing it, right? And everybody need to have their own reason, right? What are the perks of being in a VC world? That you are exposed to multiple smart people at a time. You're adding very small value to all of them, but that accumulates, right? Negative part is that you are very diversified, right? You don't have one focus, right? If you're a founder, you're working on one problem and you're very, very deep into that problem. Here in VC, you may not be that deep, irrespective of how much you try, you may not be
yeah,
that
of
deep in
course.
the problem. Right? So that evaluation you have to do for yourself, and that you will only know once you are engaged, right? So I so easy will be go to the events. These are great. I mean, especially if you are in Europe, there are a lot of events. People are very open-minded. Normally, the good part of the VC world, people are open-minded. If you just go and talk to them, they will share. You try to add some value to them, right? Find out what they are looking for. Try to add some value. With that, you can get involved and try this work or a cycle one end to end. If you think this is something for you, then great. Then you can pick up something specific that you want to do.
No, most definitely. I think there's a lot more kind of spotlights being opened up about, venture capital and the whole kind of investment scene. I think there used to be a lot more kind of, well, a much bigger shroud of mystery, if you will, around this kind of realm. But in
Yeah.
terms of kind of your perspective, do you think there's going to be any major changes? Do you think anything's going to shift in the next couple of years within the VC scene? Or do you think it's going to stay steady, how it is right now?
If we would ask somebody like the people who have started VC in 90s, will they say that this change is more or less same that people talked about also in 2000 and then they talked about again in 2010s and now it's the same cycle, or it's gonna be a drastic one? That I don't know because I'm here now, right? So I don't have that previous background to to know that it is something special or not. But there is definitely a shift. And the major shift is that earlier venture capital, right, was pretty much focused towards US, and then past decade it spilled over all over the world, which was a great thing that has happened, right? One of the major shifts that happened, that it spread all around the world in past, let's say, 10, 15 years, right? But most of those ecosystem haven't completed their cycle yet. Right? The US ecosystem was very mature, so they are like already 50-year old, so they have gone through multiple cycles, right? So they have some experience what works, what not, and how they can shape it up, right? Handle the turbulence. That
Yeah, of course.
that maturity not all the ecosystem yet had, and this current market trend or crisis or whatever you want to call it came up, bringing that blow to almost a lot of those people, right, who are new in this ecosystem and building it up, right? So I'm optimist. I mean, as a VC, we have to be. So my optimism says that this downturn that people go through and the people who persevere after, right, that will bring more maturity overall to the ecosystem outside of US as well, right? That it will bring more maturity because people have seen the cycle, and VCs are normally branded as a people like who are basically trying to pump things and not following on fundamentally strong businesses. If you look at the real successful VCs and the one we respect, they have been always doing that. So it's not a new thing that so they focused on building, but of course they focus on what is the requirement of that startup at that time, right? You can't just ask for a profitability from a startup which is like SpaceX, which is taking 7 years to build the first rocket, or probably then 10, right? But they
Yeah.
they were consistent. They were putting it on the idea that the moment this startup get launched, they're gonna be a good profitability, right? So broadly, they were always conscious of the let's say fundamentally strong businesses, right? But because a lot of ecosystem did not have that full maturity of the cycle, some of them picked and choose the part of the ecosystem which worked well for them, right? And that worked well when the things were going up, but now it's all falling down. So now everybody who gets mature and they still decide to remain in the ecosystem, now they will start picking the full package. They won't customize their own package. And that's the part that we need to understand. There are very fundamentals of the VC industry that was ignored in past, let's say, 5 years, which is not a new thing, but now it's getting reminded to people that they are important. Don't ignore them.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I think one thing that you mentioned and is really interesting to touch on. The geographical kind of focus is obviously a big factor in this, right? There's a lot more kind of sway towards different parts of the world. Obviously there's certain markets and certain geographical areas that are absolutely booming, certain ones that are not doing so well. In terms of your kind of geographical focus, where would you say most of your focus kind of sits, geography wise, and where would you say you're seeing some quite exciting trends happening right now?
That we also look all around the world. But India is definitely a geography, primarily for two reasons that they are now the Indian startup ecosystem. Lastly, they had a big boom during the early 2000s as well. Sorry, not early 2000, or let's say 2020, 21 cycle. But few things also came down now. So optimist side, as I mentioned, that the system is now going through the full maturity cycle. And now the things which is coming out now and which will be coming out, we hope that they're gonna be uh, even much stronger than the previous one. However, the last decade has gone to be a very great part for the Indian startup ecosystem, right? So overall, the macro trend in India is positive, right? Geopolitical ways is also currently looking much in favor. The startup ecosystem is going through the maturity. The entire VC ecosystem is going through maturity, and overall, there is a huge internal need of the internal market, right? So a lot of time when you try to build these kind of ecosystem in a smaller market, like in one country in Europe, then you have to go out and look for the market need for it, right? But actually, in country like India, because this the size of the population, a lot of things can be consumed locally, which helps in prototyping, iterating quickly, and improving on that. And apart from that, it's a democratic country, and they are making it even more and more easier to doing business is improving day by day, right? So because of all these reasons, we are pretty bullish on India, and that we are looking into. But in general, if you ask me, and and one of the other point is that it's an emerging market, right? So prices are still reasonable
Yeah,
to
definitely.
enter, right? And that makes a huge difference for you. In a long term, if you see, I would say it's similar thing happening with other emerging markets as well. So that's why I'm always coming from, because I'm coming from emerging market, I understand this entire thing. I am pretty bullish in all the emerging market. Of course, we started with India because apart from all the macro trend that was positive, we had our own secret sauce because we have built businesses in India. We know people here. We know nitty gritty of the situation, and we can understand what is the challenges on the ground, right? So that helped us getting started with India. But of course, all the emerging markets, I would say, is very exciting. Of course, the established market like US is also doing well, but you as a new VC will have a less added value, right? They are not missing you if you don't go to US. But if you go to an
Yeah.
emerging market, you can create a huge impact and drive an important change, which is very empowering apart from the money that you can make.
No, 100%. I think being able to make an impact and being able to, I guess, make some kind of change or influence some kind of changes, also quite rewarding in itself to be able to kind of impact that. I guess one thing I'm really curious about. Obviously, you had a quite an illustrious career so far, and you learned quite a lot from different perspectives. Scientific, venture capital, investment, all these kind of realms. Obviously it'll probably be hard to pinpoint, but what would you say is one of the biggest lessons that you've learned and that you kind of taken with you that maybe kind of impacted the way you think about investments or the way you think about an approach to a certain situation? What would you say is like the biggest thing that kind of impacted you so far in your career?
Whatever I have achieved uh, in my life or whatever I'm on the track of achieving, I was fortunate enough to have great mentors alongside me, right? And these are sometimes, these are not the mentors that you sometimes even designate in, as a mentor. Sometimes what you can call it like a conscious mentor and subconscious mentor, right? So that they can be somebody in your family that you just talk to and you get a lot of insights that you don't even think that you are being mentored, but you are while being mentored, right? Versus definitely some of your teachers, professors, or your bosses that you have been around that basically is officially mentoring you, right? But all these people in my surrounding have contributed a lot, right, to whatever I could see, and all my thought process is somehow influenced by the experience and the attitude they brought up, right? More than the technical knowledge, the attitude, how they make decision in certain situations, right?
Yeah.
So that is the most important power. So if I say my biggest learning, so how can I replicate it and keep replicating in all my, as you said, carry along. Keep surrounding yourself with inspiring people. If we keep surrounding ourselves with inspiring people, that mentorship just comes along, right? Because those are inspiring people. They love to inspire and mentor new people. So as long as we are surrounding ourselves with these people and we are adding value to them, uh, the return on investment is huge, I would say. So
uh,
it's the people. It's the people, right? And the bottom line goes to the people.
100%. I would 100% agree with that. I mean, kind of branching off that kind of biggest lesson learned. Obviously, you mentioned you were surrounded by influential great people throughout your career. Going on like the kind of a piece of advice that someone gave you that kind of stayed with you. I think obviously it's kind of a very similar question, but a little bit different in that respect. Is there any kind of advice that someone gave you that you're like, what, I'm kind of holding on to it, and now, and you kind of pass it on to, maybe founders that you're mentoring yourself, or startups that you're working with, or any kind of element I like?
Physics and I gave physics Olympiad, but I really messed it up, right? So I didn't do it well. And right after walking out of the exam, I knew that is not going. And so my physics teacher, who I still designate he's one of my guru, right? Like in India we have this culture of guru and mentor. So though he was my physics teacher, but he added a lot of my life lessons to me, had contributed a lot in my overall anything that I am today. His name is Amrin Narayan. He was a professor in the school that I went. And when I walked out, he just asked a very plain question that, how did it go? And I was like, bad. Right? That was the only thing, right? And now he looked at my face. I saw that clearly I was very sad. He just said one line and then walked away. Don't worry, no exam is the last one. And I think that applies all across, right? It's not only about exam, it's about everything that happens in the life. That is
Yeah.
not the last one. Of course, you have to try best in the every exam, but it's not the last one, right? That keeps you humble as well. That if you do good, still it's not the last one. Even if you do good, it's not the last one. So you can still do better. And if you do bad, still you can do better, right?
From
So
both
in both cases,
perspectives,
that.
yeah.
So this is what we'll do in startups as well, right? That we fail, but we iterate. So that important lesson translated across that entire in the startup industry, right? That iteration is the power, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think any startup, if anyone, I think maybe says differently. I don't think they're telling the whole truth, but any startup is going to have a lot more downs and ups, right? There's going to be a lot more challenges to overcome before you have the kind of success. And I think that kind of advice is definitely impartial to that kind of element. I mean, and one kind of point to kind of wrap things up is I'd love to kind of understand your perspective on this. I know work-life balance is a massive topic, and people say if you love what you do, it shouldn't feel like you work a day in your life. How do you balance, obviously, your kind of commitments that you have, with Riceberg Ventures and other commitments that you have as an investor? How do you balance everything to make sure that you're still putting your all into what you're doing, but you're also being able to kind of balance everything with your kind of personal life and everything in between?
But I can definitely say that I enjoy that entire part, right? So
That's
overall,
good.
the way I see that entire work-life balance is like, let's define what is work and let's define what is life, right? To be able to understand that entire work-life balance. So of course, work is, we don't need to define very clearly. We know what it is, right? That what we are doing as a part of our profession. And our life is something that we normally try to put, which is not work, is our life. Right? Like, let's say, our personal relations, our family, everything, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, the point is that more boundaries we try to create, right? Especially in the kind of profession we are in, where there are no real time limits, right? And then things can happen. You work in multiple time zones and everything. It becomes more and more frustrating. So the hack I found that basically, or not me, and I heard that from few more people as well, that we have to stop thinking about work and life as two different things, right? Uh, it's a blended work and life. You know, it's not
Definitely.
work-life balance. It's a blended work life that you should enjoy, right? Work and life you should enjoy, right? So, just giving a basic example, like a lot of the people say that how much you work, right? But I can't define the number of hours I work because I'm working maybe when I'm taking shower, right? Because a lot of my part of my work goes in thinking, right? Like if I got a pitch and I need to make my thought around it, right? That goes. And sometimes my LinkedIn post come out when I'm actually having dinner or something like
Fair
that.
enough.
So
Okay.
all these are a part of the work, right? Now the question is that if we totally separate it out, let's say with my family, with in my relationships, and I say, okay, when I'm thinking about work, you should not be involved, right? Then it's a problem, right? Then of course they need their time as well, right? But sometimes when I'm sitting in my family circle and we are just talking about, sometimes I just discuss over dinner table with my brother, sometimes even with my dad, who understand very less about the startup ecosystem, that why I'm making that investment in that decision right now. And my dad is far, far away from what does startup means, right? But that that gives the talking point within the family as well, right? I'm still involved. I'm enjoying. I'm having that nice coffee and tea time together with the family, while my thought is also out there. Just one example. It may be debatable. Some people may not agree with it, but trying to
Yeah,
find that
definitely.
and getting people around you involved in your thought process, right? Gives you that fades away of that part of the boundary, and then when you are actually doing something with them, right, which is not totally related to work as well, you're more relaxed, right? Because you don't have to think that okay, this is when I'm going with the family on a trip, I cannot think about work, so I need to finish that work beforehand. That puts a lot of stress on me. I mean, that's personally, I cannot handle that stress. So for me, it's easier to think, hey, with them also I can think about it, and it's okay, right? With them also I can
It's all
discuss it.
blended. Yeah.
It's okay. Right? So keep that blend. So that blend helps me for work life balance. So
I
far,
think
it's okay.
obviously that's
Let's see how it goes.
a Yeah, no, it's a great take on things, right? Because I think a lot of people try to draw these like very rigid lines in between, this is my work, this is my life. And then sometimes when they get blended, people struggle, with, what I'm doing next and how everything is kind of working in that respect. But I think if you enjoy what you're doing and it's part of your life, those lines are naturally just a little bit more blurred and it goes from there. But Keith, I think we discussed quite a lot of super interesting topics. So really appreciate, you taking some time to join us on the podcast today. As usual, you can find Ankit's LinkedIn, information about Riceberg Ventures below, and obviously my LinkedIn as well. And I thank you everyone for listening today. Have a great one. Cheers.
Thank you very much.